Our meeting is now live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Planning Policy and Regeneration Strategy Committee meeting for this afternoon. Apologies for absence, please, Diane. Who have we got?
We have apologies from Bob Atkinson.
And I think our deputy leader may be rejoining us a bit later, mightn't he?
That's correct.
Okay, fine, thank you. Declarations of interest, anybody? Anybody got anything interesting to tell us? No?
No.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. This is to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 22nd of September 2020. Have you read the minutes? And if you have, are you in agreement with the minutes?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. I do not have any urgent business and I don't have any announcements. So we can go straight on to response to the planning white paper, planning for the future. And I think, Jim, it's your star turn.
Thank you, Chairman. Bearing in mind that there's 26 questions for us to answer, it wasn't my intention to take us through line by line. I just wanted to pick out some of the areas where we've either not plumped for an answer and we're looking for a steer, or where there's some particularly contentious issues. Members, please do feel free to jump in if you think that I've skated over something that we should have covered in a bit more detail. So the first question asks, what three words do we associate most with the planning system in England? And the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that we haven't just gone with three words. We've suggested, I suppose, concepts, and then explained why, rather than just giving three words that would then be put into an algorithm, and well, who knows what would happen with that. So the first is housing focused, because this is clearly very much housing focused planning system that we've had for the last decade and a half or so, and the white paper itself, I don't see that being any different. The second is that it, in my view, favours private interests. And I think there's an acknowledgement that it's never going to be possible to strike a balance that everyone's happy with. However, and again, it's a perception that the current system appears to favour the private interests over the wider public interests, who have to, and it's the wider public who have to live with the developments. And of course, it wouldn't be the planning system if it wasn't controversial. The next question too, where we say, do we get involved in planning decisions in our area? Well, we're a local planning authority, so you'd hope the answer to that would be yes. Then there's a question about how we think it would be good for people to find out about plans and planning proposals. So we've tried to answer this question from the point of view of what we think the public perception might be, and I think we've got some concerns about fast tracking of applications and the automatic granting of consent where sites are in a local plan, and that's principally because with a speeded up local plans process potentially with only one consultation stage, if you miss that one consultation stage, then you won't have the opportunity to have your say about it. You won't know about it. So the first you'll know that there has been a local plan and that there is a automatic planning permission is when you see probably people with yellow jackets doing site surveys. And that feels to me that it's not ideal, that there needs to be more than one crack at having your say. On the other hand, if you're a site promoter and you've only got one crack at getting your site allocated in the local plan where it automatically gets permission, if you miss that one chance for whatever reason, then you've missed it for 5 years, and the alternative for you is to put in a planning application, which, if your site's not in a local plan, is, I think, looking ahead, trying to have a crystal ball gazing, but still, I think it's pretty much likely that that would be refused. So I think from both points of view, from the point of view of the member of the public who might miss one consultation and then they find out later to their horror that there's development going on, and also from the other point of view of the landowner or developer who misses their one shot at it, I think there's potential for legal challenge there. And therefore, I think the answer to this question about how to access plans and contribute to planning decisions really ought to be all of the above, where there's the question of social media, online news, newspaper, post, and a suggestion that's come from one of the members of the council is to say that if this goes ahead and there's only one chance of a consultation, then there should be a government mandate for large billboards to be placed on the site with specific wording to be used to say this site is being put forward for development, who to contact, how to have your say on it, which we have included in this response to the paper. Is the question about what are our top 3 priorities for planning in the local area, and the question lists off a whole load of potential priorities. I think it's difficult for us as a planning authority to choose 3 priorities out of all of the things that are listed, because our job is to balance all of them. So it's a kind of a vanilla answer to that.
So we're jumping through to the next question, but question number 4,
Yes.
I think is really important, because so many of the difficulties we get into is because people haven't realised, for one reason, either they've been on holiday or they've been away. They don't look at the papers. I mean, I was up in Scotland the other day, and there was a huge row going on, and they said, "No, it had been put in the local paper." Well, no one reads the local paper, and it's so unfair that this system expects you, as an ordinary member of the public, to be constantly looking at what your planning committee. Actually, you don't look at what your planning committee. Once I go off the planning committee, I shan't be looking at the planning committee and what it does. I mean, but if there is something really important, then you need to know about it very much earlier. And actually, as far as local plans, this is all about local plans, as far as I can see, is the general members of the public don't actually get themselves involved because at local plans, because they regard that as being policy of a general nature, which is worked out by the council, which to a large extent is what a local plan is about. But it's not about saying, well, there's going to be a bloody great development next to my house, and this is your only opportunity of doing it. I mean, it just seems to be manifestly unfair, that.
So that's where this idea about a billboard comes in, I think because allied to that, and another idea from the same elected member is that because of the automatic permission would effectively remove a large revenue stream from the planning department, which is my personal concern, because of course I have to make sure that there's enough money for the planning department, because we wouldn't have the large outline applications, which don't just pay for the planning officer who's determining those large outline applications. They also pay for the planning committee to meet, and they pay for the local plans to be prepared. Now, if we're in a world where we have 30 months from start to finish to prepare a local plan, whereas currently it takes a number of years, we've got a number of problems with that to do with money. So local plans are really expensive, like hundreds of thousands of pounds to prepare. And when we have one statutory stage every 12 months or so, then we can spread the cost of preparing that plan over that 3-year period, say. If we're doing it all in 1 year, maybe 1.5 years, then we've got a lot of money to find in a short space of time. we're potentially losing the outline application fee income. So the idea is to say, where landowners are putting sites into a call for sites that we do right at the start of the process, there should be a fee for that, at least at the same amount as the current outline application fee, because we have to do a lot of work as a result of those sites that go into the call for sites. And in effect, what we'll be doing with this new system is dealing with a planning application right at the front of the process, really, when we get down to the detail of it. I suspect that's how it'll go. So the idea being to say, look, you have to put this big billboard up at your expense to tell everyone that it's happening, because not everyone reads the paper, not everyone's online, not everyone sort of, finds out about this stuff through the current regulations that tell us how to advertise these things. And you have to pay for our work in progressing your site through the process.
Can I bring in Sandy? I think you'd like to have a word.
Thank you very much, Anne. Chairman, I just want to say that the last question that we were talking about people not knowing about planning applications, and also the idea that they will only be dealt with online with IT, seems to me to be basically anti-democratic, and we need to watch out for that.
I think a good point.
I take that point, and that is put across in the written response.
Yeah.
Okay, let me find.
I don't think anybody else want to say anything at this point.
Well, it's just that I wondered if you could, if we should be beefing up this reply, pointing out to the government that, as Sandy says, that not everyone does read, have a computer. As not everyone certainly not everyone reads the newspapers, and that what they're proposing may sound very smooth, but it isn't. It's going to be very impractical and bring a lot of misery to a lot of people.
You're absolutely right, John. I had a phone call today from a lady I think you all remember, and that's Janet Elliott. Janet used to sit on the planning committee, and she's in her 90s now. And she doesn't have a computer. She has never used technology. The only piece of technology she uses is a telephone. And at the moment, she has a broken neck, so she is quite disabled, and of course needs people to tell her what's going on. Yeah. She reads newspapers, but we don't put things in the Daily Telegraph that we're going to build. For example, trying to build in one of my villages a huge number of houses that we don't need. So Janet was a bit upset with what we're doing at the moment. And this is a 95-year-old, very intelligent woman, no technology. So yes, you're all right. We need something better. I think, Elaine, you wanted to come in.
Yes.
And then Marianne.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as regards newspapers go, what you read in the newspapers of a planning application is absolutely useless. Half the time, it doesn't even tell you where it is, what it is, or anything else. It's just so skimped over that most people can't make head or tail of it. So I totally agree. I think it does need to be more online, perhaps on social media, so that people know about these planning applications. Perhaps there's the town council actually do display the planning the lists when they're in the council, so that people know what there is coming up. But if you're only a small council, then obviously you wouldn't know at all. I totally agree that big billboards would be an excellent idea, so that people, and with numbers on, so that people can make a comment or whatever about various places.
Good. Marianne, I think you wanted to come in.
I think you should just add one sentence, which is that this is effectively disenfranchising the over 75s who do not have computers and do not understand modern technology, although they are very bright and contribute a great deal to society.
Agreed. Martin.
Yeah, I mean, as has been said before, information is power. And it's the thrust of this document is it doesn't really want people to know about planning applications because it wants to speed everything up and run it through. I was one thing I'd missed until I read Jim's report was this thing about if it goes to a if an inspector looks at an application, you might be given the opportunity to phone up and speak. You know, the whole thrust of it is really anti-democratic, and I think that's the main thing I think we should be trying to get over. I mean, because I think when I did this exercise for Toaster Town Council, and my 3 words, one of them was of the current system, for all its faults, it is democratic. Well, what's being proposed, in my view, certainly it isn't.
We're looking for speed, and speed isn't really what we need. It really isn't, because there are going to be a lot of mistakes made because people haven't seen the it and buts that go with it. So yeah, I think everybody is of the opinion that this is too quick, too speedy, and really it's rubbing us all up the wrong way.
I'd pick that up, Chairman. Question 5, part 3 of the response sets out the fundamental concerns that we have with it, and the third part of that is well, we've entitled it democratic deficit. So if I read it out to members, so you don't have to go switching between screens or whatever. There's a big question mark about some people's ability or willingness to engage with online planning, and there's a resultant risk of excluding a significant group of people. It's arguably that same group which is most active in engaging with the current system, and the implications of this need to be carefully considered and understood. So I think we're saying similar things, but the officer draft was a bit less direct than what I've heard from members on this call. So I think
Can we beef it up then and say it's essential that you know, this section of society is able to find out about all.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's scope for us to say, look, the digitizing planning, really good. Let's do that because it engages potentially engages in a part of society that generally finds it difficult to find out about things because they don't read the newspapers and don't go to parish council meetings or what have you. But that shouldn't be an either or. I think we should have it. I think we should have them both, because it's the whole of society that's impacted by the outcome of planning. So it's the whole of society that should have the opportunity to have its say on it. I mean, whether the balance ends up being struck where every individual wants it to be struck, well, no, it won't. But at least giving everyone the equal opportunity to find out about things and engage with it, I think has to be a fundamental aim of the planning system. And that's the vibe I've got from members on the committee.
And can I just add, I think you must emphasize that we are experienced this. When we see it firsthand, government doesn't see that. I mean, because we are the people who administer the planning system. So we speak from rich experience.
And being local, John,
Yeah.
we do understand our patch.
Yeah.
We really do. And you're quite right. We all here, I'm looking round, we do have a massive amount of experience, don't we?
We do.
So yes, and I think somebody sitting in London in the House of Commons makes me shudder a little bit. I have to say that they are going to decide what is good for South Northamptonshire, because I'm darn sure that they've never been.
Right.
So yes, I don't think we're very happy with it at the moment. Go on, Jim. Oh, sorry, that's Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I agree with everything that's been said. Absolutely everything. My only issue is question 3. Has anybody read question 3? Because it's a simple enough question, and I don't think it needs over a side of A4 to answer it. And I don't think we've answered it. It simply says, how would you like to find out about plans and planning proposals in the future? Simple.
Yeah. Social media, online news, newspaper, by post. It does actually say or other, doesn't it? Please specify.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know what other, but I suppose the idea of the the poster outside the site, that would be one of the other ideas.
Yeah.
Very good. I think.
So we can move the text that's in that answer to question 3, because I think that text really ought to be included in the response. Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to change the answer to that to say all of the above plus the billboards.
Yeah,
Good.
billboards is excellent.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
on
sorry,
mine. I
Paul.
can't claim that.
Paul, you've got something to say.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I want to go back to paragraph 5, subparagraph 3. I might be playing with words, but I'm not very happy with the end of the last sentence. Implications of the need to be carefully considered and understood. What we need there is it needs to be carefully considered and arrangements made for the people concerned to be involved. To me, understood could easily be followed by and ignored.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I went quiet. I was taking notes. Okay.
On you
I'm
go.
going to move on. Thank you. So we've spoken about the local plans already and the concern about speed, quality of outcome, costs. So I don't really want to go into that in detail unless members wish to. The question about replacing the existing legal and policy tests with a consolidated test of sustainable development. I think that the devil will be in the detail there, and I think it's worth raising the risk that ultimately the High Court will be asked to clarify what that intention was, but we don't have the detail to be able to pass meaningful comment on that at the moment. I don't think. I'm just going back on experience when duty to cooperate was introduced, and we all thought, oh yeah, this will be fun, and then of course, you know, when it started going into operation, it suddenly got very, very complicated really quickly and ended up with a number of High Court cases that were clarifying what it should do and how it should operate. And I see the same thing as a risk here. There's then a question about what should we do about strategic planning in the absence of duty to cooperate. And there's a little bit of sarcasm in there about, well, maybe have regional strategies or regional planning, but there needs to be something. And I noticed that there's various bodies with an interest in planning, both private sector and public sector, that are looking at what are we going to do as higher level strategic planning, because we can't not have anything. But again, there isn't a proposal on the table, so it's difficult to pass a meaningful comment on that, I would say. There's the question about the standard method for calculating housing requirements. I think in principle, there's scope for cautious support for that, but I think it's the more caveats get applied to it, then the more complicated it'll inevitably end up getting, the more scope there is for challenge, which is more scope for delay, which then means that in the meantime, we've got planning by appeal. So I'm concerned about that, and professional bodies generally appear to be concerned about that as well.
Can I just ask here, Jim? I'm always confused about method for calculating how many houses we should have and what our supply is, because are we running on two methods here in SNC?
Yes.
You know, at one hand, I'm told we have an 11.8 year supply, and then comes crashing down, and I'm then told, no, we've only just got over a 5-year land supply. So what is the reality that we have here?
Well, the reality is that 5-year supply is a bit of a game of cat and mouse when we get to an appeal. So the local planning authority needs to demonstrate that it has a 5-year supply, and the appellant needs to cast enough doubt on that the planning authority hasn't demonstrated it has a 5-year supply to the satisfaction of an inspector. And the reason that's important is because if it's established that you can't demonstrate a 5-year supply, then your housing policies in your local plan have reduced weight, and that then opens the door for an appeal to be allowed. Now, the white paper talks about removing that 5-year supply from the game at all, and talking about delivery, which is something that we as the planning authority have even less control over than the supply. So in the same way that we can't compel anyone to make a planning application, we don't have the powers to compel anyone to build what they've got permission for. So there's an issue with that. However, I think the short answer to your question about how do we know what our 5-year supply is being measured against is it keeps changing. That's why it's confusing. The standard methodology comes out, and then there's clarification, I'll say, around how that standard methodology should be used. In other words, there's lots of caveats for local circumstances, constraints, etc. So then we get into this big mess of spaghetti where we're arguing about, well, are you constrained? Are you not constrained? How constrained are you? Can you look elsewhere to deal with your constraints? And you see, I can see you're getting bored of me saying this already. And that's where we get into with all of these appeal inquiries.
Oh, Stephen, I think, please, you put your hand up. You're unmute, Stephen. We can't hear you.
Mute, you're muted.
Yeah.
Don't know why the space bar wasn't working. We've got the 5-year supply, which we worry about, but then we've also got the targets which were set in the core strategy, which we thought we'd met. So we thought we were okay there. We met the rural housing for 2029. And then there are a lot more complications concerning targets for affordable housing and the different, is it a formula approach? Is it a local housing needs survey? Different. So it is a complete nightmare, I think, trying to work out what housing we should be providing.
It is.
Yeah. So the local, the white paper proposes that there is a method of calculating what your local requirement is, and your local plan must allocate land to meet, I think, 10 years of that supply. So you must have the 10 years allocated in your plan with sites. And with if we move on to the 3 zones of land, so you've got the, I don't have it right in front of me actually. So we'll say high, medium and low growth. Let's call it that. So the high growth is your sites that you're allocating for development. And those are the sites where you would have automatic plan permission in principle.
Now, they're sustainable, aren't they? The sustainable sites.
Yes. Well, they would be sustainable because we would be allocating them. Yes. And we wouldn't allocate unsustainable sites. Then we've got the renewal areas. It's coming back to me. So then we've got the renewal. So the first one is the growth areas. The second is the renewal areas, where we say, well, there's some constraints and there's some you still need to put applications in. Then maybe there'll be permission in principle, which still has an application, or maybe there'll be something else the government hasn't decided. Those are other areas that could do with a bit of growth to support them, but not really big stuff like major urban extensions. And then there's the third zone, which is your leave it alone zone. You're protected. So that's going to be things like national parks, maybe Greenbelt, maybe not, don't know. But Greenbelt's not relevant to us because we don't have it. So within what's likely to happen, I think, and again, I'm just, thinking about what would I do? looking at the proposals, you're likely to have a continuation of major urban extensions with some rural sites, on the edge of villages, and not a lot else really happening. I think you'll have much more of a focus on the big urban sites because they'll automatically have the permission. But I could have that completely wrong. It's just my, me trying to apply logic to what the situations, what the white paper suggests the situation is going to be.
Jim, I don't quite understand your last sentence there. We believe that energy and money would be better spent on other ways to achieve better outcomes. You don't clarify that. What do you mean by that?
Sorry, where are we?
Well, I think I've got the right thing. Do you agree that a standard method of establishing housing requirements takes into account constraints should be introduced?
Okay.
8A.
8A.
Oh, 8A, right. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. What I was getting at by that is if we're going to do, or we as in the UK planning system, someone's likely to end up with a High Court challenge. And I think that they're very expensive. And really, we don't really want to be distracted by High Court challenges. So what I was getting at there was keep it simple, or keep doing what we know how to do, so that then we all keep out of the High Court, and then we don't have to worry about getting distracted on things, and we don't have to worry about wasting money on let me take a step back. So if one council has a High Court challenge, but there's 10 other councils that are all doing the same thing, then those 10 other councils are going to stop, because they're going to go, well, we're not going any further.
No.
Because we're going to risk being either the High Court decides that we're all doing it wrong, which is your worst case scenario, or something. So it just
I think I see where you're going. I think you could clarify that.
I think clarify what I mean. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's all. I think what I'm saying is absolutely right.
Okay. Okay. So then, already spoken about the outline, the automatic permission. Just a lot of concerns about automatic permission. One thing that the planning officers came up with as a risk of automatic permission is if that's what happens if that's given, and then when they start to work through the detail on the site, they find something that means it's undevelopable, but they've got an automatic, they got a permission in principle. So it's like having an outline and then you come in for details and you can't develop it. Whereas actually through an outline planning application process, if we suspect, or if we know, because we've got really good constraints maps at the planning authority, so if we know that there's something about a site that's a big problem, say we know that HS2 is safeguarded through the middle of it, or there's a high pressure pipeline or something like that that makes the site either really difficult or impossible to develop, we can flag that up with the applicant, and they can either pick a different site or do something different than what they're proposing to do initially to take account of all of that. But if you've got a permission in principle, or like a deemed outline planning permission, then it's much more difficult, I think, to row back from that. And again, there's potential that someone ends up getting sued. So I think it's worth us flagging that up.
And again, you're speaking from experience, which they aren't.
Well, it's they're experienced planning officers, and they're thinking it through, and they're thinking, so
well,
how does this work then? And we said, well, we don't know.
Exactly. Well, I just think in our comments we can draw on our own experience.
Yeah. Okay. There's a proposal about the nationally significant infrastructure projects, the NSIP, bringing new settlements forward using that that method. Now we have an NSIP in our district, which is the rail freight terminal, the Roxhill Seagrow scheme. That was an NSIP. So South Northants Council wasn't the planning authority that dealt with that application. We didn't get a fee for it. We were a consultee, the same as everybody else. So the idea that effectively the quasi-independent arm of the government, with planning inspectorate, would be determining whether there's a new settlement in our district. I think that there's a democratic problem with that. There's also a procedural problem with using the NSIP process. It's very, very, very tight. So you get your permission, which is in effect it's one long Section 106 agreement. So everything is legal rather than quasi-judicial, like a planning permission, which means that they have to have thought of everything up front, or it needs a fresh application to change it. So I think there's democratic accountability question, and there's also a fit for purpose question, which to me, both of those things mean that I wouldn't go anywhere near allowing new settlements through the NSIP process. Okay. We've talked about accessible web-based plans a bit. The statutory 30-month timetable has its issues in terms of our ability to resource it. There's a question about, should we retain neighbourhood plans? And we say, yeah, they're good. They're working well, we think.
We shall see, actually, in Kislingbury, if the neighbourhood plan is actually going to work well for us. I'm meeting with the parish council this evening, actual developers for the 44 houses that we're going to have built. And I note already that the new developers are quietly wanting to change things. So we'll see if our neighbourhood plan, which, let's face it, did win a national award, is going to help us this evening. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, so can I go back to number 12? Do you agree with the principle of 30-month statutory timescale? I mean, it seems to me that it took us 6 years to produce our last local plan, but a significant amount of that time was from the government, waiting for government to do something or other. And for the inspector to arrive, the inspector to report, the inspector to this and that. And that doesn't seem to be, it always seems to be on us rather than on them. I mean, if they're going to speed these things up, then they need to have a planning inspectorate that can actually deliver the inspectors at the right moment to do the right things, because we are delayed all the time. And I think that is a point we should be making to them.
And I think the general public don't understand that it's not our fault.
No. Exactly.
We are dependent on somebody else. I think we have to be seen to be right as far as the general public is concerned. And unfortunately, sometimes it really isn't our fault.
No.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've made a note of that. Okay. So there's a question about, should there be a stronger emphasis on the build out of developments, and if so, what should that be? Again, I think there's a really good suggestion from the councillor who's made the two previous good suggestions around using the tax system. So if a development is liable for business rates or council tax, for instance, from the moment that it's consented, then there's scope for taper relief to be introduced to encourage early development, so that once it's occupied, then the tax liability transfers to the occupier or the owner, rather than the landowner who effectively would have that it would have that tax liability because the obligations run with the land. Coupled to that, there's also scope to amend the time limits for implementing a consented scheme, which we do currently have some flexibility around the time that we say that a scheme should start. But that a developer can make a start, ask us for a certificate to say I've made enough of a start for it to be lawfully started, so which is usually putting an access in, like a proper access in, and then they can sit on it for years and years, decades in some cases, but they've implemented their permission to keep it alive. That's not going to help us to get any houses or commercial properties or anything else built. That's just going to end up with a whole load of accesses onto sites to keep permissions alive. So I think it seems to me that using the tax system while it's outside of the planning system's control, that doesn't make it a bad idea.
Sandy, did you want to come in? Yes. Unmute.
Thank you very much, Chairman. On that point, although I'm not talking about large developments here, but I mean, just very quickly, there's a particular place in mind, which is not 100 yards away from where I'm sitting. It seems to me that although there's this commence by deadline set out in a permission, there's nothing about complete by deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get somebody who is building a house and then a second house on a plot which goes on for 10 years, which has impacted on the mental health and physical health of the surrounding residents, continual construction traffic, continual construction noise, so that people can't sit in their gardens summer after summer. And I've lived here for 6 years, and so I know for sure it's happened for 6 years. And there seems to me to be nothing that can be done through the enforcement officers and teams to actually get anybody to finish a development. So it goes on compounding the problems. And surely it is time that perhaps, I don't know about big developments because that's not what I've been experiencing, but surely there should be some kind of finish, end by system brought in when it comes to individual developments, because people are just feeling completely without any power whatsoever to stop this erosion of their kind of the amenity of their, not only their only property, but the enjoyment of their daily lives.
Yes, and I think that's where I think principally the idea was about large sites, but it would equally apply to that sort of situation. If you're paying for it, then you want to enjoy it. You want to have it finished because you have to pay for it anyway.
Sorry.
Yes, John, and then Paul. Yeah.
I just say, with the interim rural housing policy, that we did put a time limit on all those developments, and it worked very well. And all those developments were built within 2 years, I think, if I recall. And so I don't understand why, if we were able to do it for that, why can't we do it for other things?
I need to look into that.
Paul, you've got something to say.
So I was just wondering, although this sounds like a good idea, I do wonder whether it could disadvantage small builders. I was thinking particularly of Wales, where perhaps it's a slightly different system. There's a lot of small builders down there who develop a site of 2 dozen houses on a one-by-one basis. They literally get the profit from one to build the next, and so it carries on. So that could be one reason why these things take so long. If you only have a small builder, but if you bring in a time limit, you could well force them out of the market, or out of the market of small developments.
Okay. I think that's where the idea for some kind of taper relief came in.
Martin. Can I bring in Martin? Martin, you got a point?
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea about some form of taxing developers to encourage them to build out it seems attractive, but I think the downside is, one, it would add possibly to the viability of a site if they thought if the developer couldn't be certain to develop. Markets generally in recent years have continued to grow, values of houses go up, but there's no guarantee of that. So I think, you know, just a time limitation is probably the safest way of ensuring that a build out, particularly with larger developments. I don't think tax penalties or adding costs in for developments that don't go ahead is really a viable approach.
Okay. Not sure where to go with this really, because there seems to be a difference of view.
Well,
I'm reading it wrong.
Certainly we're asking for time, aren't we? We want a time limit. I think that's very important. But
Yeah.
We're all agreed there needs to be mechanisms to ensure faster build out and not for just land banking. Because the reality is, as we know from sources, you know, there's enough permissions in the system already theoretically for 300,000 houses for the next 4 or 5 years at least anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stephen, you've...
Yeah, more or less similar lines. I mean, my view was not one based on taxation. It was based on limits. Let's say it was an application for 50 houses. You work out the reasonable time to build 50 houses in, and you know the 50th house has got to be built, preferably occupied, but certainly built by a certain date. For much bigger projects, you would have to phase it. So phase 1 would have one completion date, phase 2 a later one, and so on. And it's difficult, it's messy, but I don't really know how else you can do it, and you've got to do something, because that is the problem. And I mean, the problem is developers sitting on land banks. I mean, they've always done it. It's not new. It's not a new phenomenon. Builders always grabbed land when it was available, got planning on it, implemented it, and then thought, well, we'll get round to it one day, but we don't need it yet. And that's the difficulty. So I do think that we have to look at the idea of completion dates.
Thank you. Elaine. Elaine, did you want to say something?
Yes, I did. With regards to the build-outs of properties, isn't it an idea to put a time limit on the actual house build itself? Because some of the builders do, they sort of say 16 weeks per house. So you can actually work it out from that when the site is supposed to be completed.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll put in the response.
Sandy.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say very quickly too that I think as a local planning authority, we have a duty of care to residents who are living surrounding developments, and bringing some kind of end to the building time would mean implementing that duty of care, and it would be very unfortunate to see any legal action being taken by people because they consider we are lacking in a duty of care.
Thank you. Marianne.
Sorry, I'd forgotten to put my microphone on. I think we really ought to make it easier for the officer. We ought to have a vote on whether we think it's a good idea that we use tax as a penalty, because I personally think that would be a very good idea. Anyway, on big developments, we do have phases 1, 2, and 3, I seem to remember. So we're very reasonable, but it is this land banking when they get planning permission and they just sit on it. So I would all for taxing it, but our officer needs to know what the committee thinks. So could we have a vote on it?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Marianne has proposed that we take a vote on whether you would want to tax, put a penalty of taxation on it. Do we have a seconder for Marianne's proposal, please? We do not. Yeah, Elaine.
Yes, yes, I think it would be an idea if you tax the sites that are land banked.
How did you decide that?
If you've got a lot of land bank properties and they're given a certain length of time to build out, say 3 years, if they haven't done that, then they get a tax bill.
Stephen.
Chairman, I think that as this is a consultation, there's no reason why we shouldn't put both of the ideas in for consideration if Jim is okay with that idea.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there are two ideas there. They both got merits.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else, you know, decides. But at the moment, we've got nothing at all, and there is nothing to prevent land banking. So I see no reason why we shouldn't make a dual suggestion for, you know, consideration. Two ideas are better than no ideas.
I think
that's a good idea.
That's a good idea. I think we're a bit more in favour, aren't we, of putting in the two suggestions rather than just one. Do I see everybody reasonably happy with that, please? Yeah? Yes, Jim, I think
Okay.
the two suggestions, and that's a time limit, and then taxation.
That's great. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Okay. There's a question about what do we think about the quality of design that's happened on new development in our area, and we've said, well, we take it very seriously, and we've had national awards to recognise that. So we're happy. We're comfortable with our position on that one. There's another question about what's our priorities for sustainability. And again, I thought that was difficult for us to be able to pick a priority, because it's our job to balance them all and not just choose one. So I think we've talked a little bit about what we've done with our local plan part 2 to try and assist with sustainability in terms of allocating sites, but also the development management policies around electric vehicle charging points in particular. Okay, there's
sorry, are we still saying we have to have electric points in garages on new build estates?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what the local plan part 2 that's adopted says.
Yeah.
And that's the way the wind's blowing anyway. There's some of the more forward-thinking house builders are doing that anyway, because they can see that they can command a higher price for it because it's more attractive. In the same way that like high-speed internet was started to be put into houses about 10 years ago, wasn't it? Maybe longer, because you know some developers thought, well, we can sell these for a premium, so let's do it. And then it became the normal thing to do. Okay, there is quite a bit about questions of design in there, and there's a proposal for a new national body, which is currently being created anyway. So I think there's even if we didn't support that, I think it's pretty pointless to say we don't, because it's happening anyway. But you know, from my point of view, I think the more emphasis that's placed on good quality design, the better.
I do slightly get the impression from this this paper that having bashed us about with a most unsuitable lot of questions, they then think that good design is going to solve most of them, and that I think is rather patronising in a way. I think it's stating the bleeding obvious to me. I mean, we have, and I'm so proud of our council because we have produced a really good design guide over a number of years, has to be said, and that has now really come to effect, as we can see in the developments that are going on around us.
Yeah, I think there's a tension between what the white paper talks about of using the planning system to secure good quality design and what other parts of the planning system are doing with permitted development rights.
Yeah,
where you can demolish a freestanding commercial building and replace it with a building for a different use of the same size, but there's no design control over that. There's no affordable housing from that. So the sustainability and the quality of places as a whole, which is what we're interested in, we have no say in that at all, and we're just watching it change in front of us.
If you were to say to you could, I think, reasonably say to this government, look what the damage you've done with allowing these offices to be converted into little rabbit hutches, and the misery that it causes, particularly in the COVID epidemic we're going through now. These people are living absolutely in really disgusting circumstances, and that's entirely brought up by government policy. So, is that right or not? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think so. And to be fair, the government has responded to that criticism by talking about minimum size standards now. Because previously there was no requirement for a window, so now you need to have a window. And because there were flats being built, or properties being converted with flats within them that had no natural light. So that's been stop's been put to that. But there's always going to be room for improvement in these because of the nature of them, and the developers who are attracted to those schemes are attracted to them because they can fit a lot of units in.
Yeah.
And recover their conversion costs very quickly. You're not going to get if I call them standard volume builders getting interested in those office conversions, I don't think, really, because that's not what they know how to do. They got a different business model and they want a different reputation.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the government needs to pay attention to that rather than trying to bash us around.
Okay. So there's a question about what is our priority from new development that comes in that happens from the area, and I think from our point of view, I put forward we've got an issue with infrastructure. In particular, we've got some very major roads that run through the area, including motorways. And when there's a problem with the motorway, then everything snarls up. I mean, it's inevitable that happens because of the amount of traffic that motorways carry with them. But that means that we've got a number of pinch points, and we've got a lot of traffic coming off of those main roads through. So the suggested answer to what's the priority and what comes with new development in our area, is infrastructure generally to support it, because it feels like it's creaking a bit.
Well, there's the famous road to nowhere, isn't there? Which literally borders the borough and us. And that is supposed to relieve Sandy Lane and go right up and join Northampton North, isn't it? But I mean, that road has been cordoned off and ready to be built for years. So why don't we press for these things to happen?
Well, I suppose the good news is that the planning permission has been issued on the site now, earlier in the year.
Well, that's right, Norwood Farm, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. So the road was not necessarily to nowhere. It was to a site that nearly had permission. But, as it's been in the news recently, it's a semantic point, really, isn't it? It's not a great look to have a road sitting there that needs to be maintained, that was put in to unlock that land for development, and then the development doesn't come. So I think the white paper talks about the idea of looking at what infrastructure there is in place and putting development where the infrastructure is, or where the infrastructure can be quickly and easily upgraded to cope with that new development, rather than the position that we're currently in, which is it doesn't really matter that much what your infrastructure is like. if it's creaking or not. If it's there and it can be upgraded as a result of the development, then usually in an appeal situation, then the developer's likely to successfully argue, look, my scheme's going to fix this infrastructure problem. It's not always the case, because there's some infrastructure problems that can't be overcome by a development. But you know, I'm just talking as a general rule here, that there is a potential change of emphasis as a result of the white paper to say, let's start looking at where the infrastructure is really good and put growth there rather than having to chase it all the time. A bit like Milton Keynes did when it was experiencing that new town growth. It always put the infrastructure in first and then built around it.
Yeah, through you, Chairman. Yes, I remember Milton Keynes when it was first being built. It just had all the roads and street lights and nothing else back in the 60s and early 70s. So I suppose what we're trying to do is implement this around here, where you can't do that when you've got built up area, can you?
You can't well, you can, but it's more difficult and it's more expensive, I think. And where speed is of the essence, which is what's running all the way through this white paper, speed is of the essence. So I think there's proposals in there for new settlements, as I talked about earlier with the NSIP. Government's interested in investing in infrastructure to get building quickly, and we're interested in making sure that it's done right and in the right places. Okay, there's some quite techie questions about infrastructure levy. So the idea is to abolish the Section 106 and the community infrastructure levy and replace it with a different infrastructure levy that potentially could be at a nationally set rate, which I think that makes sense, because if you have a nationally set levy, then it doesn't, it reduces the chances of one area looking to compete or grab growth from another area by charging a lower levy, and conversely it reduces the risk of one area trying to resist development by increasing its levy. However, the question is, the government asks, should it be at a single set rate or an area specific rate? On balance, our response is have it on an area specific rate, so that, in other words, in a wider area, so not just the district, there's this the levy rate, so that then we're not getting into a position where there's a temptation to try and game the system, I suppose I'd put it, if I'm being blunt, which I'm sure I'm known for. There's also the idea that if we know what the levy rate is, and we know what the amount of development we've allocated, because we've allocating the 10 years worth of growth, should we be able to borrow against our anticipated infrastructure levy receipts? And I'm a little bit nervous about this for the simple reason that what happens, I mean, so if we'd have been asked that question a year ago, then I think it would have probably been the answer of, well, yeah, why not? Because we're okay. We're experiencing strong demand, good growth. Developers are building out the schemes. But today, that feels very risky to me. So if we had borrowed millions of pounds last year on the basis that we were going to be getting, I don't know, for argument's sake, £250,000 in levy income this year, coronavirus hits and we get £50,000 in levy instead, and again, I must stress, I'm just making these numbers up, then we've got a big hole in the budget in year one. Year two, like next year, can't be that confident that it's going to improve hugely as things currently stand, and very, very quickly we end up with a debt that is unaffordable for us to continue to service, and we end up in a big financial hole. So I think it's but on in the same breath, what I wouldn't want to do is all councils say no, it's too risky at the moment, because some councils will want to do that. And so from my point of view, I think the answer is a not sure, because of the risks, but that shouldn't stop others from doing it if they want to.
Stephen, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I did my own submission, and let me just see if I can find what I wrote for this one. Basically, what I saw as the problem here was spending money. I think it's more or less what Jim has just said, actually, spending money that you can't really be confident that you're ever going to see again. And you're not really confident about the income appearing. The trouble is, because it would be so uncertain, that whoever you borrowed the money from would be charging you so much in interest rates, because it would be basically an unsecured loan. I don't think any sensible authority would even be able to. I mean, I can think of some local authorities that might actually jump at this, but I think it would be very unwise, and they're authorities that have got a track record for not handling money very well at all. So in my response, I just said no. I thought it was a bad idea. Thank you.
Great. And anybody else like to have a Sandy?
Sorry, Chairman, it's Martin. Martin's had his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Martin. Do you know, I've been looking right and left.
I wrote a response as well. I was trying to look up what I'd written. I mean, I agree with the text as Jim has set out, and I think all the arguments, really, it's not equivocal. I don't think it's a not sure. I think it's a no. I mean, that's the argument presented, and it's an argument I agree with. So I think it's a no.
Anybody else like to have a word? I certainly would share Martin's thoughts. I think it's very frightening, in fact, particularly at times like this, to want to even think about borrowing money. And we must bear in mind what's happened to other councils because they've borrowed money.
I agree, it's a no, Chairman, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm happy to change that.
Right.
John, yes?
Yeah, agree, absolutely.
Yes, agree. I think we're definitely a no. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we're nearly there now. So there was a question about affordable housing, or there's a number of questions about affordable housing, and I think we've got a bit of nervousness about some of the proposals in the white paper, and one of those being that if affordable homes are built, but there's a viability problem with the site during the development, then they can be flipped to be market homes, which set alarm bells ringing with me. And there's also the question about where we currently have commuted sums that we can take. So we take pots of money in lieu of affordable housing on a site, and we build off site. So there's a question: should that be be able to continue? And I think the housing department was keen that it's able to access money if it's not able to access the homes on every individual site, because the housing department has a responsibility to ensure that affordable housing is provided. But there is a little bit of a caution there about the ability to flip the tenure.
Are we still? You have to build 10 houses before you have to put in affordable housing. Are we still of that mind?
The I got a little bit confused about this when the other consultation was going on. So there was an associated consultation that closed a couple of weeks ago, I think, that was talking about raising the threshold of affordable housing to 40 or 50 from 10. And there was in the planning press and I think national press actually, there was talk of that costing the country around about 30,000 affordable homes a year if that threshold was to be raised. In effect, that for South Northants, that would mean no affordable housing on any sites other than the major urban extensions to the market towns and Northampton, which I think is a problem for rural settlements who need to have that places for people to live that they can afford to live in, to be close to family and support networks, people you grow up with, and you shouldn't just be priced out, priced out of where you want to live and where you've lived your whole life. So we responded along those lines to say that we're really not keen on that, and we don't see what the benefit would be to raising that threshold.
Again, I think it's because central government sitting in their ivory tower, they don't tend not to think about, we have tiny villages. Literally, I mean, I think we've got, how many? We've got 90 odd villages or something? No, 70 odd villages, haven't we? In our South Northants. And some of those villages are very, very tiny. And, we need to be kind to old people who need smaller places to live in.
Mm-hmm.
Don't understand that in London, I don't think. Martin.
I mean, the other issue under this sort of heading really is, and there's no really reference to it as I can see in the paper or our response, is, we all talk about affordable housing as if it's just a block. But of course, that what's really missing in our district, as in other areas, is affordable housing with social rents.
Yeah.
There's a lot now of privately rented homes in South Northants, but of course, because house prices are high, 80% of market rent is a lot of money if you're on low income, but there's very little scope for getting affordable housing which has a social rent, which may be 40 or 50%, which is much more realistic to people on low incomes. And even in a prosperous district like ours, still there's a significant minority of people that are on low incomes and really would benefit from affordable housing with a social rent. And it tends to be the larger builds where there's virtually non-existent. So I suspect in Brackley, certainly in Towcester, there's no predicted social rented housing at all, as far as I can see. So, I mean, whether Jim could comment on this, is there a way of making this point?
I can comment on that. So the housing department, when it's looking at the money that it has, so the commuted sums I was talking about earlier and other pots of money, it needs to make a judgment as to what type and tenure of housing to seek. So in some cases, the biggest need or demand in the area is for subsidised purchase for housing, and the housing department needs to make that decision to accept that or not. In other places, then affordable rent and social rent, there is that tension between the two, and the trade-off is social rent are more expensive per unit. So I don't like talking about houses per unit because it's a home. So let's say social rent are more expensive per home, so we get fewer of them if we go down that route. So it's a constant trade-off the housing department has to make on a case-by-case basis. I mean, in my conversations with the housing department at SNC, their starting point is we want to get social rent if we possibly can. But if that means you only get 2, whereas you could get, I don't know, and again, I'm just plucking numbers out of the air. If you have a choice of 2 social rent, 10 affordable rent, and you've got a waiting list that's got 10 on it, then you're going to go for the 10 affordable rent, I think. So I'm not sure how, unless the definition of affordable housing is changed again, I'm not sure how we can address that to turn the tide back towards social rent on our own. Well, we can't do it on our own because we don't have the money for it. It needs the government to change the definition. Now, if that's the view of the committee, that we write that in our response and we say we would like the definition of affordable housing to be changed to exclude affordable rent. If that's, I don't know, I'll be looking for a proposal really as to what exactly it is that you're looking for.
I understand the dilemma, Chairman. So,
Anybody got anything to say on this? Nothing you want Jim to put forward in particular? John? Unmute.
No, I think it is very complex, and it's very difficult for us actually to comment on the whole thing. I mean, I've always been I find it very difficult to get the difference between the two. I know there is a difference, but I mean, all I do know is that we appreciate, and I think that again with this current crisis, we realise how important it is to have people, the health workers and the rubbish people and all the people who do who really we need, rather than the hedge fund managers or whatever. Those are the people who we all rely on, and we need to support them and give them the places they need, where they must be able to live comfortably within our villages. Yeah. So that's the only way I look at it. But and I think that is probably what we also feel.
I think it is. Elaine.
Yes, I think we need the affordable rent, because it's amazing how many health workers are looking for affordable rented properties. When I was in hospital the other week, there were some nurses trying to find affordable rent in Oxford, and they could find nothing below over £1,000 a month. Whereas I think around here we'd probably be slightly under that. And easier for them to rent something and travel into work. So I do think the affordable rent is something that we do need.
Thank you. Stephen, did you have your hand up? Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, just to go back a step, the question only arises because of the proposal to do away with Section 106 agreements. If you don't do away with Section 106 agreements, then almost the question doesn't arise. But if we assume that they're going to do that, then we're looking at SIL. And I think listening to other members, I think the issue is a very simple one, that whether we agree with their proposals for affordable housing or not, the point is, why are they only confining the debate to affordable housing and not to social housing as well? And I think really it's a simple enough point I think we could probably make there. I don't know that I necessarily disagree with their response to affordable housing, so that's fine. But I think we need at some point then to make we need to point out that, yeah, that's okay for affordable. What about social housing? How are we going to deal with that? I think that's, to my mind, the essential question.
Okay, fine. Jim, have you taken those points on board?
I have, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on then.
Okay. We're nearly there now. So there's a question about should an affordable housing be ring fenced? So the question, well, what that's about is, at the moment where there's a viability pressure on a development, then the go-to place to address that viability pressure is to reduce the affordable housing on it. So I think the question here is recognizing that that's a problem and asking should affordable housing be ring fenced or not. And our proposal is our proposed responses say, well, yes, we think affordable housing should be. There's a methodology that will be needed for it, but it should be done.
Yeah.
And there should be a percentage of the levy receipts should be used on affordable housing until we've met our requirements.
John.
Well, surely the difficulty comes on sites where there is an overwhelming need for something. I mean, the classic example, of course, is Toaster South, where you had this overwhelming. It could not happen without a bypass. The bypass is going to consume most of the funds that are necessary, and so you get into the situation where you would potentially can make sites absolutely unviable, and there are sites that you badly want to bring on. So you could get caught in your own mess, so to speak, if you're not very careful. If you've said, well, and there's no doubt that we have on occasions reduced the amount of affordable housing in the interests of other matters. I mean, even good design had to, and good design is really important as well. So it's not as simple. It's really not very simple. And I think the government again needs to realise that every site is different, and it's no good having a government diktat which says you've got to do this. Because you get a government diktat, it cannot cover possibly every situation that every council has to face.
Do you think? Can I ask John a question, everybody? Do you think that I've got a phone that doesn't stop ringing? Do you think that possibly? Sorry.
No,
I'm a bit distracted now, so
we're going to have Mary Ann
else
anyway.
put their hand up, and I should come back to it. Martin, did you put your hand up?
I did. I mean, John really highlighted a classic, really, in that Toaster South couldn't be developed without the relief road, and therefore developers. I remember speaking to me 15 years ago or longer.
Yeah.
Or this will only deliver 12% affordable housing. So and sometimes it's in other areas to build sustainability and communities that people want to live in, which means maybe a community centre or other social facilities or better schools. And there is that trade-off, because the sum of money that the site delivers for community benefits is unfortunately fixed. And if you block it off into one area, obviously very important, affordable housing, you could still end up then with communities that don't work because you haven't got the design or the infrastructure that's demanded by a new community.
So really, I think what we're saying is we're not all the same.
No.
We
need the local flexibility. Each site is different.
Sorry, every site is different, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what we should be judging. I mean, that's what we're there for goodness sake.
Yeah.
As a, I don't know what they think we do all every Thursday, every month. I mean, we do try and solve these problems, and our officers solve them with us. And we've been very successful.
We put our heads on the block, and sometimes have to speak to our residents in a way that and tell them things they don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And we're elected, to take those tough choices. And often politics is about making choices.
Yeah.
There isn't limitless resources, but if you have centralised schemes, people will be more and more unhappy, and they'll have no redress.
I think they will. I think, and because we're a rural area, I think that's why we are vastly different from each other, aren't we? So we are different, Jim.
Okay, so I think we don't think that there should be a ring fence because that takes away our local discretion to respond to local individual circumstances.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And that every site is different. And that needs to be emphasized to them. And that every site has individual problems.
Yeah. Okay. So I know what this means. I'm just writing horses for courses.
Good.
Okay. I think that's about it, actually, of the points that I wanted to draw out.
I think they've been very
Yeah.
important points, actually, that that we've made. I really do. I think you've chosen well, actually. I think
Thank
it's
you.
exercised everybody's mind.
Could,
John.
yes, could I just conclude? I think that your paper is very good, and it's given us a lot of, and I hope we've helped you, just fine tune it a bit. But I do think that I hope that we will. I suggest that this paper, our response goes to our MP, because this is going to become a very political situation, and I feel extremely strongly as a Conservative that they have just not thought it through properly, and I think we've got to rely on our MP and other Conservative MPs to actually twist Mr. Janrick's tail when he's not negotiating with Manchester City Council or the Mayor of Manchester. There's Mary Ann's I'm going to have a go.
Well, less we say about the Mayor of Manchester, the better. Well, ladies and gentlemen, do you think
you want Mary Ann here?
Do you think you've had a?
Can I just say something?
Yes, Mary Ann.
Is that I think it's also important that when we send this to Andrea Letson, we say, would she like any of the officers to come and explain it to her?
A good idea.
Yes, well,
very good idea.
Put that tactfully.
A briefing from off.
A briefing would probably be a very good idea for her. And our other MP is Chris Heaton Harris. And he's very quiet, like a little mouse, really. So I think perhaps we need to push him along as well.
The mouse that roared.
Jim, thank you very much for your hard work. Now, our recommendation, it was to agree the council's formal response to the planning for the future consultation. But we have to add there, don't we, with the points that we've actually raised with you.
Yes, Chairman. The second part of the recommendation is to authorise me in agreement with the portfolio to make any changes as a result of this discussion.
Yes, but I really must emphasise that you must take into account everything everybody's made here, because I think there have been some very, very constructive suggestions. Am I right, everybody?
Yeah, agreed.
So you're in agreement with that?
Yeah.
Can I propose, Chairman, that we accept that recommendation?
Thank you very much. Are we in agreement?
Agreed.
We are.
Agreed.
Right. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, everybody. I think it's been very constructive. It's been very informative. And I think we have done actually our rural area good.
And we'll be seeing Jim again in 10 minutes or an hour's time. Is that right? Or an hour and a half's time?
It's 5 o'clock, yes.
At 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. God.
Unfortunately, I won't be there because I've got a shadow meeting to attend.
Oh, God. Thank God
There we are. So thank you, everybody. We're going to close the meeting now and go and enjoy what's left of the rest of the afternoon, really.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
What's at 5 o'clock?